Imagine leading a global team spanning continents and cultures without ever meeting face to face. Long before remote work became the norm, Dr. Bill Bersing was a trailblazer in the early 2000s, working in a hybrid environment, splitting time between remote and in person engagements. This unique experience sparked his fascination with virtual executive leadership and set the stage for his groundbreaking 2009 dissertation on the subject. His research focused on the multinational engineering service industry, exploring how leaders could build trust, foster collaboration, and ensure success in virtual teams. At the time, this was uncharted territory. Fast forward to today, the world has changed dramatically. Technology has advanced leaps and bounds, and the COVID-19 pandemic has transformed virtual work from a niche practice to a global necessity. Now, Dr. Bersing is revisiting his original research questions to explore their relevance in today's world. He plans to expand their scope, opening the conversation to leaders across industries and cultures to better understand how they're navigating the complexities of virtual leadership in a rapidly evolving digital landscape. In our discussion, Dr. Bersing reflects on his original methods, outlines his plans moving forward, and dives into questions cold, offering fresh perspectives on how leadership principles have evolved. Together, we explore key themes such as building trust, managing diverse teams, leveraging technology, and defining success in the virtual world. I'd like us to maybe start out with the study itself, so that way you lay the groundwork. Can you tell us about the study for virtual executive leadership?
So I did this, having not read this for a long time, it was a study that was conducted on virtual executive leaders who made over a certain amount. At the time, I think it was 120,000 a year, which was a lot more than what it is now. This was 20 years ago almost. So these leaders that I interviewed were doing business. Most of them were outside, some were inside the United States, but they had global teams. Most of them were virtual executive leaders in the multinational engineering service industry. But people like Dave Link were in the business management world for Accenture that worked overseas as Americans and had virtual teams everywhere. So there were a few people that were not in the industry. For this particular, I'd like to change it up a little bit and just do it not just in multinational engineering services, which was our focus, but in the global market, because I think in the global market with IT, with the business, with even the manufacturing and all the different experiences I've had with some of the other industries, there's a lot of good things that could come from that as well. So when I did the study, I did it, I believe, with 20 or 22 interviews. And what I did is I went out and I said, here, fill out this online survey, demographics, how much really do you make? How much experience do you have? How long you've been in the industry? When did you graduate college? All those things. And then I sent out a letter saying, hey, with the letter, you agreed that we'll keep this confidential unless you allow us to do it, to expose this information, but we'll only use this information basically for this study, for the dissertation. So we'll have to change that a bit. But once I did the interviews, I had questions, and it's a qualitative, grounded study. There's a lot of information and research on qualitative studies, but at the time, and even now, there's not that much on qualitative, grounded studies. There's a couple of books about it, but basically what it means is qualitative versus quantitative. The quantitative studies is about numbers and about real things statistically you can come up with, really the mathematical answers of this. Whereas a qualitative study, you'll do interviews and you'll transcribe everything. And when you do the interviews, you basically, I did the interviews both face-to-face and virtual, but in both of them, I took notes on the facial expressions, the hand gestures, the things that you don't see when you're talking and taking notes. So those have to go into it as well. So when I did the transcription, it was word for word. Hopefully we can get it word for word now, but it was a really good exercise for me to go back in and actually listen to the interviews, because sometimes when you're giving questions and you're giving these interviews, you think that you're getting an answer and you're not getting the answer that you thought or you wanted, or that everybody else got, they're totally talking about something different. So you have to be really aware of what people are saying. So that was a good exercise. And then when I did do the interviews and I did do the transcriptions, I took them and I took all the interviews and I used this program called NVivo. NVivo is a program that actually looks at qualitative research and comes up with common themes and impressions, like the same words that have been used, how many people came up with, hey, this is a good idea virtually. The trust was one of them that came up all the time. So I would go back in and during my research study and actually doing the common themes and impressions and all that, I would say, oh, here's what 10 out of the 22 or 10 out of the 30 people said during the interviews. And I gave some quotes because the NVivo just really, it wasn't artificial intelligence, but basically that's what it was. We didn't call it that at the time, but that's basically what we're talking about now. And it was really useful for me to come up with those ideas. And I come up with my own by going through the research and going through the study and saying, oh, this is what they said. And then I remember what people said, and then I put that in quotes. And basically the grounded portion of the study is that you come up with, you take your research, you take your dissertation question, and you say, this was grounded in research, the answer, because people said this. And so all of your research and your qualitative study is grounded, your theory is grounded in the research. And my grounded research was based on the fact that in order to obtain a very successful virtual teams, there was 3 quadrants or 4 quadrants, whereas you had to have trust and you had to have face-to-face meetings and at first, and then it goes off to the right. And once you have those successful virtual teams and virtual meetings and you go away from the face-to-face, you can have it more virtual, and then the success still goes up, but you have to have long-term continuity. So that was one of the major things. So trust and long-term continuity and face-to-face meetings was basically what the conclusion was. There are other things that I can say right now, but that's basically it in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you. So you had mentioned it would be great for you to answer those questions to kick us off. So would you like to get started with answering those questions?
I do, with the caveat that, hey, I asked you to look through it. I asked you to give me the questions. I really didn't want to look through the questions. It's been some time since I have looked through those questions. So it's getting me cold. And when you do a qualitative study, and I want to do it the same way we did before, and we go through the study, if the questions change during the study, then we can change it. It's not set in stone that you have to ask these questions. In other words, if some of the questions that I don't even remember what they were, but if some of the questions are very obvious right now after 20 years of 15 years of not asking these questions, then we can change it up and do something that's more relevant to this time period.
Okay. And we
Yeah,
can, okay. And then those questions will stay consistent with all of the people that we
exactly.
ask.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But it doesn't have to literally be consistent. It just has to be informative enough in order for us to come up with a grounded theory, whatever
Right.
that theory will be this time. I think
Right.
the real question is whether or not the conclusions that I had 15 years ago and the theory is still valid in this,
Yeah,
before and after COVID. Is it
absolutely.
something that's more valid, or is there something that changed? Because I don't know, maybe something changed. Maybe people don't think you should do it this way. Maybe there's some thought that, hey, you don't even need to have face-to-face meetings anymore. You can build trust by doing this and that. But there's a lot of teams that don't even meet face-to-face, which is very strange to say. But there are some that don't. Even back 15 years ago, I'm sure there were teams the virtual teams that never met. And what's the success story? But we're talking about things that have to be program that's got to be successful. Some of the larger construction, engineering, and construction programs that we work on, you have to basically meet. You have to do partnering workshops. You have to meet. So it's in a world that I think that maybe in the future we can do it without ever meeting each other, but in this day and age, I think we got to stick with the fact that there is some point of meeting face to face for successful teams, whatever that means now. Anyway,
Okay.
hit me with the first one,
All
and I'll
right.
hopefully remember what happened.
How do you and your organization use communication tools to create and preserve trust in the virtual team setting?
Nowadays, we're using mostly Microsoft 365 with MS Teams, and then there Zoom, and then there's how do we use it? We use it every day. So on the last program project that we had at NIST, and I don't know how much of this I can say, but we had a pretty big program there. We had good, sometimes 30, 40 people on these calls. We used virtual teams, even when we were in the office meeting face to face every day. We had teams, we had meetings. We didn't basically, we weren't really allowed to transcribe and record anything, so we didn't do a lot of that. But in our internal meetings, yes, we did do some of that. In our internal meetings, it was good to have those things recorded and those meeting minutes. After every meeting, of course, we had the meeting minutes and this and that. So we did a little bit of that. But it definitely helped us in many aspects of it, because especially at that project and doing some of the other things we did overseas with our claims and some of the other things, you can't meet with people face to face. And with COVID, we couldn't meet with them at all. So those were really important. So to answer the question, which is, what was the exact question? What do you
Yeah, so
use
it's
for doing
about
teams?
trust. It's about
Yeah,
how do you create trust. So how do you and your how do you and your organization use communication tools to create and preserve trust in the virtual team setting?
it is. Some people would say, and I hate to do this because it really doesn't really matter at the long run, but having those meeting minutes, and we had certain people, well, I'm not going to name anybody, but we had certain people who would say things, and then 2, 3 months they'd change their mind or say do something different. I don't want to say lie, but basically the situation changes, so they're off on a different angle. But having those meeting minutes, put them on track that, hey, here's what you said. And not that they would ever, people have a tendency to lie, basically. I don't think I do it, but many people do, one reason or another. And it puts everybody on track that they can't just say things and lie about it. Now, do I like that? No, I don't like that at all. I don't like the fact that we have to go back in and look at meeting minutes to say, hey, Jack, you didn't do it. You didn't say this last time. You said this. That to me is not a good, trustworthy relationship. But it is something that helps keep people informed when we do the meeting minutes after each meeting. It's a little time consuming sometimes when you do detailed meeting minutes, and you have to have the right person to do it, because not everybody can actually do meeting minutes. We did it basically at the end with just bullets, and here's what was said. And then we'd have our meeting minutes from the last time, and we'd talk about it. And so that helped build a little bit of the trust that this is what we're doing, this is what we're saying. And really, the tools to help foster the trust are there in the virtual world, but I'd still say meeting people face to face and having those off. I hate to say it, but not really in the meeting, but like before meeting, coffee breaks, or just, hey, Jack, how's it going?
Mm.
Tell me about your life, especially with COVID. That was extremely important for us. It was way more important, people like to believe, because most of the engineers and people that I work with, they're more task oriented. They're more transactional. They don't really give a crap. They just want to get the stuff done and get out and go somewhere else. But having that relationship with somebody to say, hey, if you're a hockey player or you're playing soccer, a lot of people ran and they did things outside of work. Those things, not with just me as a leader, it's okay, yeah, it's more important for me to understand who they are. That way I have that connection with my employees and the people that I work with and for. But it's really important to get that. How can you do it in the virtual world when you're only doing this virtually for months at an end? It's tough because you don't want to have a lot of these meetings. And that was another thing that was bothersome, that we just had too many of these virtual meetings and getting stressed out. And I just heard and read some research that women are more stressed out than men after an hour and a half of a virtual meeting. How is that? Why should you be even stressed out of a virtual meeting? And what does it mean when you're at home and you're stressed out? What does it do to your psyche? How does that influence the trust? I have no idea. I think that having that stress, some aspects, it has a lot to do with not having trust in the team that can do what you're asking them to do. You're just stressed out about the situation, whatever tasking you have to do. So yeah, it's a hard one to answer that. To what tools do you do to build the trust in the virtual world? I spoke to another lady that works at, what do you call this? Not Facebook, but
Meta?
the Meta. Yeah. she was pulling out all these tools that they use. Meta. They don't use Microsoft, of course. They use the whole Google world, but they have other tools that they use, with like Whiteboard and all this stuff. So that's important. Those tools that I've never used are important to use. But yeah, having the tools like Teams, which I'm sure there are other equivalent to it, not in the other world, but to be able to look at your screen, to be able to use Bluebeam, which is a great product. It's like Adobe. Even Adobe to me is great. But Bluebeam and Adobe were great tools to look at drawings and look at things and to get the team together. And even using Word and Excel and coming up with these risk management spreadsheets, and then having all this, here's the probability of this risk to actually happen. And then you have the percentage, and going into all those team workshops virtually with everybody understanding what it is, because sometimes that risk isn't really, even though you wanted to say it in a one or two sentences, it's really not understood by everybody. It's a scheduling risk, or it's a risk with radiological contaminants, or whatever it was that we were talking about. Everybody needs to be crystal clear on what the risk is and how it could impact the program or the project that we're working on. And getting that trust that, hey, from our client, that, hey, we're taking care of it. We understand what the risk is. Because sometimes as the program manager or as the construction, whoever team member you are, you don't understand what the risk is, especially if it's a scientist who has to get money for their project. And if they can't get money by February, then their grant they may not be able to do it because they don't have a place to do it because we're doing construction. So there are things that you have to pull out of people that are the end users, and they just think everybody knows it. They think that their evaluation of the risk is like everybody else, because of course they've said it in these meetings. But unless you really understand what it is, and then the whole team understands what it is, not just the manager, then those tools are really important to pull that out. Whether it's Excel, Word, Bluebeam, or whatever Google has, whatever Microsoft has, it doesn't matter as long as you get that tool out there and you use it on the virtual team. That answered it. Yeah, so they can see it. So everybody understands it. And there are some good tools out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really good. How do you ensure virtual member diversity is accepted and clear?
Oh my God. Yeah, from 20 years ago or 15 years ago now, that means a lot. It's hard. The context of that virtual domain diversity has changed probably a little, because diversity, of course, is, hey, how many women, how many different cultures, what does it mean in the virtual world 20 years ago? It's the same now, but it's like your diversity in this multinational engineering service industry question is, hey, you got Italians that are on this team, and you have Americans who may not understand what the Italians' point of view is. And you have other team members that are in India that are doing the design, or there's that diversity is what we're talking about here. How do you ensure that they're doing it? You got to meet face to face. You have to understand the culture. You have to understand what you're getting into. If it's a larger program like what we were doing versus a project, we have to understand the boundaries of everything, where the cultural differences are, what it means to be in vacation in Italy in August. That's a cultural thing. That's a cultural diversity thing that most people wouldn't get unless they actually step foot and work with the Italians, because they're going to take, no matter what they say, on the 15th of August, they're taking off. The whole month, basically, it's a holiday. And they value their home life and their vacation more than anything in the world. Whereas Americans, and I think many other cultures and some other things, and even Italians in some aspects, that it's not so prevalent. It's if there's something that you got to do and it's after hours, and you have to get this thing done on a weekend, you're going to get paid for it and you're going to work it. Whereas in Italy and many of the other European countries, you didn't. You're like, hey, that's crazy. I have to go to dinner with my wife. I have to be home with my kids. I have to. Those are way more important than getting the job done, which is crazy to say.
Yeah.
So I don't even have a good answer for how do you implement diversity. Even now, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. What do you think?
I think that
Interview me.
you said it at the beginning with the face to face.
Yeah.
I imagine that you know the Italians very well, but if you had to work with another culture, you would probably get in there in the beginning and find out, like you said earlier, you'd find out all about them and anything you
Yeah.
need to know. What is their holiday schedule? I work with Pakistan gentlemen who do development work, and they have a lot of holidays.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that at first, but if I had gone in the beginning and found out the holiday schedule, it would have been a lot easier on the work load because I could have worked around it. And so I think a lot of the answers that I've heard you say in the top 10 challenges of program management, it's all about getting ahead of things. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. You got to meet face to face, and that's the best way to do it. And I've seen a lot of programs and projects fail because they're not taking it seriously enough. They think that, for example, they'll give a contract, a design build contract overseas to somebody, a company that's an overseas company, and they just assume they understand everything there is to know about construction with the U.S. government, and that they are clear on everything. And there's no, they'll just have these virtual meetings because they're in the U.S. or they're in Naples or somewhere else in Europe, the Army Corps of Engineers or something, and they'll just would not meet face to face, not understand what their dilemmas are and what their challenges are and the questions are, and they'll give the contract to them and they're like, okay, still do this virtual thing, and then the first thing that comes up that isn't per the federal acquisition regulations, they'll just say, well, you didn't read your contract. This is obvious. And yeah, it's obvious to an American, but is it obvious to somebody that's, you know, have some experience with the U.S. government, but culturally in that world or in that country that you're actually doing it in, is it the same situation or is it different? And more than 90% of the time is totally freaking different. They're just trying to meet the needs of the U.S. government, and they do that, but then doing something else for that country that they have in the contract that they have to do, it gets out there, and then you trip over each other. But I'm telling you, if we had a meeting, a face-to-face meeting on many of these little arguments, their disputes or change orders, then it would have been pretty clear from the beginning that this is a risk and this is something that we needed to talk about before they go on to the next stage. So I know I'm speaking in cryptically because
Right.
you hit a little nerve here, but it's definitely something that we need to look into to do more of the face-to-face work.
And it comes,
at least at first, before we just dive into this whole virtual world.
I think you said
Yeah,
it
go ahead.
really well earlier about the know-it-all attitude, and diversity really requires curiosity more than knowing.
Yeah.
When you go into any sort of new cultural environment, it's better to not know it all. And if you come to the space with curiosity and listening skills, it's one thing to meet face to face, it's another thing to listen
Oh
during the
yeah.
face to face too.
When you talk about virtual, you can't state the power of an email going back and forth and the impression somebody gets with an email, and then you have that virtual meeting or you have that talk. It really is hard if you don't really know the person. If you don't
Right.
you get to spend 10 minutes and say, hey, man, what are you doing? And I have cases where people are going on vacation and the other client doesn't even know it because they're scared to tell them that they're taking 2 days off. And then they're wondering, the client's wondering, why are you taking so long to respond to me? Dude, there, there are people that are behind everything that we do. And if you ignore the people behind them, you're not going to get what you thought you were going to get at the end. You're going to get the bare minimum, or you're going to be happy, but you're not going to be ecstatically happy. And it can only always be a transactional thing.
Exactly. This brings us to the third question. How do you properly manage meetings and work life cycle in the virtual work setting?
Yeah, I thought about it a lot. I understood this question before, but it's been 10 years, always thinking about this whole question. So it, I personally, because I've had experience in this world before COVID and after COVID, realized there's some real benefits with working virtually. And you know them too, because I let you go and you're an employee of IPS, and it's definitely something that you have to manage yourself. You have to say, hey, I have time to go to the store for 2 or 3 hours this afternoon with my husband because I'm working virtually and I can do it tonight.
Yeah.
There's no 8 hour day here.
Yeah.
And then it's strange because I work with people who are European, come over to the US, or they're still in Europe and they have a 9 to 5 job. They're not working on my hour, they're working on their hour.
Mm,
And they have to be at their desk, no matter if they're in their office or in at home in their office, because they're getting paid for that time. And they
mm,
have to clock in and clock out. I know we have a time clock and a time system at IPS and I programs, and we do that. But I don't expect you to clock in and clock out like a robot. You say you work 6 hours, you work 6 hours, you work 5 hours. I don't care when you work that hour. It's your time and your life balance that you have to manage. And you'll have a more fulfilled employment, whether it's part-time or full-time, if you're the leader, like me, the person who is in charge of paying you and is engaged with you, is way more lenient on when you work. The other good thing is that when you're working on the virtual teams, you can take advantage of your team working in India or wherever else, in Pakistan, and working in Europe, because and even Australia for that matter, because there's a time difference. And when I'm working, you guys are sleeping. And just like us doing the stuff in Greece and Turkey and Bahrain and these other areas in Djibouti, I'll be working and then they'll say, hey, can you fix this email to the commander or this letter to the contracting officer? And we need it. We want to give it tomorrow. And it's always 100% of the time, it's their time. So they want to give it tomorrow, their time in the morning, which is great for me because I can work at night, their time. And when they wake up, it'd be like 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or something, and they'll respond with the email with the letter and all the corrections and getting it out the door to the commander or the contracting officer, whoever it is. So it seems to work out a lot better in those virtual things. But again, we're working kind of a hybrid. I think most of the cases where you're meeting a day or 2 days, 3 days a week in the office. After COVID, this has been more of the norm, where you allow people to work 2, 3 days in there at home. And that's really super bothersome for people who are managers, because they want to make sure everybody's doing something. They want to make sure that they're just not playing video games the all day, and they're
yeah.
doing stuff at home. And how do you do that? And we're not counting widgets here. We're doing things that require your mind. We're writing papers. We're doing evaluations. We're doing quality assurance. We're doing monthly and weekly reports. It takes some time to do it. But I'm not going to be on Craig because he's working at home today, or Shaik because he didn't give me that report in the normal working hour. If he wants to do it at night when he's not busy with the kids or going to the store with his wife, that's perfectly fine with me. It's only when it impacts my deliverables that I have to get a little concerned or upset. But if I give them the leeway, man, they appreciate it mostly and they get more done. You'll have to ask them about that. Maybe they have a different opinion because there are deliverables and there are things that you have to do to be a high performance team. And that's basically what we were and what we are. And so that's a little bit different than many other teams, but it's a matrix organization. You have a primary and a secondary duty. There's a lot to expect out of your employees, but you have to understand they're only working 8 hours. They're not working 10, 12 hours. And if they are working that 10, 12 hours, then let me tell you, they're going to work 4 hours next week or something during the weekday. And they have that freedom to do it. And I'm not on them all the time to do that.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Yeah, the work-life balance and the flexibility when you have that, I found that having that flexibility allows when there is something that needs to be deliverable, it's easier to just jump in because I'm not burnt out from just doing 9 to 5 every day. So it's great. I love it. How do you or your organization use technology to observe virtual team performance?
I don't want to get myself in trouble, but there's artificial with Copilot and with some of the Chat GPT, and I can tell you what I've done in order to observe virtual team performance. I go into Office 365 and I look at all the emails that come from my team members. I look at all the meeting minutes that have to do with my employees. I ask questions, upload some of the documents that I have, let the Office 365 Copilot look at the responses, look at the deliverables from Sally or whoever it is that I want to know about, and then come up with a summary of what they did this month or come up with a summary of what they did this week. And that's powerful. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
That little tool, because that's what you do. What do you want to do if you're like, you have a team of 15 people or 10 people and you want to come up with, hey, what they do? What did we accomplish this month? Did they accomplish all the things that we thought we were tracking this month? How do I get this information? I know that I remember some emails from 2 or 3 of the people, but not all of them. I can't be responsible for everybody else's job on a program. So I have to use that tool to do it. And before that, I could give you different answers of how we did it. I just went through my emails and I went through all the reports. And then I gave them a call and said, hey, man, give me your report. Give me this, give me that. I still do some of that, but I also go through that Office 365 and I come up with even what my customers came up with and what questions they had or what deliverables they gave me as the team, what things that we needed to look at, what things that their team other than what our team did in order to improve the program. And then we come up with that monthly report. Man, it's powerful. It's really nice. I don't put in all the detail, but at least have a good summary of what everybody did on our team. And then when I get that information back, hopefully I do it alongside of what Sally gave me for the monthly report or for the weekly report. And then I put it in there. And that tool in itself is just invaluable nowadays. It's so much, improves things so much you have no idea. But
and probably speeds up the process too a bit.
Yeah. And other things, if you can record and you get everybody's permission to like record things and you transcribe things, you can ask Copilot to summarize the meeting minutes and summarize the deliverables or summarize the taskings, in Copilot. And then I love Copilot, but only for certain things. ChatGPT does great things as well. Those are the main tools I use. With ChatGPT, I'll take meeting minutes and I'll take summaries and do even scheduling, and I'll put things up there and say, hey, what is this? And ask a question and it'll come up with an answer. Those are pretty cool too.
Yeah.
So using that technology to me is extremely important. I know people use Zoom. I know people use MS Teams. We were talking with a couple of people about other tools that they've been using. I mentioned NVivo, which is a great application. Haven't used it in, 5-6 years. Tried to use it a few years ago, right before COVID, to do some other research, but it's one, it's expensive, and two, it's a little bit much to use. statistically, there are a couple good applications out there that are pretty good. When we look at some of the surveys, we're trying to do one for American Society of Civil Engineers right now to find out what we should, in Virginia, what we should focus on. And that's going to go out. But man, the tools behind that one, I'd like to use MS Forms, and that's what I'm pushing to use, because I know that the forms are excellent with the results and all the statistical stuff you get in the background of who said this and who said that, with statistically what the answers were. And I know that Google has the same type of thing, and I've used Google before too. I'm not sure what Google calls it, but they have their own survey thing. And then there's Survey Monkey, and there's all these other tools you use. But for me, I like to use the Microsoft 365 only because it's really super easy. It's not difficult to have 10, 20 or 10 or 13 questions, and then taking that and saying, hey, make a questionnaire out of using 365 again. Okay, it just sucked up. It doesn't get it perfect. You got to add in some of the other questions, but it does a pretty damn good job about taking the questions I prepared in Word and using it and coming up with usually it truncates the questions because some of them are similar, but it's okay. Here's the 5 questions. Or I'll say, here are my questions, but based on the American Society of Civil Engineers vision, what do you think these questions should be? And then it'll come up with a couple more questions. But yeah, it's technology now. I could get into it. It's really exciting. Having done this thing at VMI for the seminar class, and that was one of the questions. What do you think the opportunities are for our students here in the future? What should they focus on? And I'm like, hey, but it's hard to answer it, but focus and get really good with artificial intelligence and all the applications and all of the world. It's not just the applications, it's all the stuff behind it, because that's going to change our world. We're going to have to do good as an industry to be able to set the standards and the code of ethics of how we work with it. But in the future, 5-10 years, man, that we're going to talk about this more and more every day, because those tools, like you ask, are going to be way more important for the next generation than it is for our generation.
How do you evaluate virtual team progress? Some of this, I feel like you did.
Yeah, I did. And with what I've learned in the past, it's the progress on the team to me is all about how people are getting along on the project. Because for me, if the employees don't know each other and they don't have strong interpersonal communication, or if somebody doesn't know that Jack likes to go out and play soccer every month, or the virtual team member in India or Pakistan is got to go on vacation with his family, there's a huge holiday in Greece coming up, and it's Easter, but it's not the same Easter as what we have. That's how I evaluate people. Because if you don't have that understanding of the team members and you don't have that trust, what are you doing? You're just trying to get the widgets out of people and getting that transactional stuff out of people. And so that's good. Some people technically are good at that, and they throw the hammer down and they get the work done, and they somehow exceed our expectations because they're being diligent about all the detail and they're doing it right. But how right is it to piss people off while you're doing it? And how right is that answer if you're getting the answer out of somebody that's going on vacation the day of or the day after you said, here's my deliverable? You're not making good friends, and you're not creating that team with long-term continuity that we need to have in order to keep this program and the company going to build long-term success. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
How do you allow for virtual team members to gain something from being on the team?
How do I allow virtual team members to gain things from being on the team? So, like everybody, some people do it for a salary. Some people do it because they like to contribute. I'm on a couple of boards and the board of trustees at Randolph-Macon Academy, and all these people like to contribute because they feel that they're contributing to the bigger picture. They're changing the world around them. So how do I ensure that? So after having your virtual teams and your meetings virtually, and hopefully meeting face to face, a little bit of both, but initially face to face, talk to your employees. Make sure that they understand how you value them and what they bring to the bigger picture. How are they enhancing this supposed high performance team? How do they play into it when they're invaluable doing their job and their secondary job? When the construction manager leaves for a week on vacation, that person had to pick up that. If that somebody does something that's outside of what their really normal work is and they do a good job, they have to be recognized. Now you can recognize them on the call, which is a great thing to do, to say, hey, Jack did a great job. Fred was out of town and a couple people couldn't make it to the office, and now they're doing all the quality assurance, and now they're doing the construction management, and they're reporting to the customer, and did a great job on today doing that. But without saying that out loud, without putting it in writing, it's really hard for people to understand their value of being on that team. Somebody has to recognize you for doing that. I don't know.
That's great. What makes an outstanding virtual team leader or project manager?
One, it's just like in the face-to-face world, one who has good interpersonal communication, one that has the ability to listen and understand the not just what's being asked, because I think a lot of the time it's not the technical things that have to be asked, but what it is that their team members need to do in order to be successful. Do they need training and stuff? Do they need you to listen to them, the fact that they're on this basketball team once a week? There are weird things that make people tick, and if you don't have good interpersonal communication, you don't even care about it. You don't even care what they're doing. You just want the widget done. This person can do it, and you don't know how to get it out of them because you don't have enough interpersonal communication to be able to talk to that person and understand well enough to be able to get that drive into them. It's not about understanding what their pain threshold is. It's not about saying, hey, you're incapable and doing this negative motivational thing that I've seen people do. It's about getting behind them so they can understand that they have significance on the team and that their part in the team is valuable for everybody on the team. And that's hard to do when you're in the virtual, because you're looking more of transactional and the widgets and this and that. So you got to really understand it enough to understand where you can back off. You can have that face-to-face meeting with whoever, or you can have that one-on-one call, conference call, or just call with somebody just to say, hey, this is what we need. This is why your input is invaluable. And does that come with training? I don't know. Some people say it does because it's more leadership than management, but I'd say, yeah, you can get trained up on that too. It's not something that you can't train people on. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yes. And what differences, if any, do you see in organizing new virtual teams versus organizing teams face to face?
Yeah, a lot easier to get going when you're organizing something face to face. It's a lot easier to understand the strengths and weaknesses of people. It's a lot easier to understand where your teammates are from. It's a lot easier to understand the other nuances that you can't get when you're on a virtual call with people and the taskings that you're asking them to do. I can get on a virtual call and I can say, hey, yeah, let's get together. Let's talk about this new program. Let's figure out who's doing what. Let's figure it out, what our deliverables are, or even doing a pursuit and doing a proposal and trying to figure out who's doing what. I can do that on a call, and we can do it with a bunch of people, and we can get a lot of things done, sometimes even quicker because you're just making these decisions. But if you had that same meeting face to face, you may come up with a different take on things.
Right.
And you definitely have that trust, the building of the trust initially really good, especially if you've been working together face to face for a long time. You have that long-term continuity. It's not going to be long before you have that face-to-face meeting and just get really productive and understand what's going on. If I'm if I'm away, like we have the face-to-face thing and we're meeting all the time, and then we're meeting on virtually, and then we're meeting again on some big project. If I had that big project after 2 years not talking to them, and I had it face to face, and I'd give them great advice of we need to hire so and versus virtual that we need to hire or do this team with this company. I guarantee I could convince them face to face better than I could if it's virtually. Because virtually I haven't been on the team. I don't know. I'm just a guy that's hasn't been on the team for 2 years, haven't talked to them. They'd have to, oh, okay, I've never met these people. But if I met with them and then I told them who these people were, not just in, it's just a bit different. There's a
Right.
nuance there that you cannot overestimate how important meeting face to face is, even now. Now, does it have to happen all the time? No, I think if you're meeting, you have a good long-term continuity, and you've met with them face to face, and you're doing this stuff for 2-3 years virtually, and you have a meeting, and it's a really important project. You could actually do it you could do it virtually. It'd be better face to face, but you could do it virtually and be very confident that you would succeed. But having these meetings, and we do a bunch of them, where we look at opportunities. They're either overseas or they're huge project and programs with these larger companies, and they need team members, and they want me to look at their proposal and do red line reviews and all this stuff with them, or just be a team member and give them stuff, or look at quality assurance or whatever it is. It's definitely hard to do it virtually. I think we gravitate. I think it's just, this is really important to understand. We gravitate as people towards transactional when we are working virtually. We do that without even thinking. You're like, hey, I'm calling Jack. It's virtual meeting. I need to know X, Y, and Z, and that's my transactional. Once I get it, then I'm off the phone. I can go off to task B. If you're meeting face to face, it's not so much transactional. You're understanding what their point of views are. They're understanding the value of what they produced and what they did. And it's not that you're slowing down. It's just that you're not as transactional, because there are other things in this world that are important as well. Does that make sense?
It does. So, what project success factors are different when working on virtual team versus face-to-face teams?
After all these years working on both aspects of it, I think the difference is when you're really working on a face-to-face team, and you can't even say it anymore. You have to work virtually a little bit, but if you're on a team, you get that trust, man. You build it up. You understand it. I'm going to Christmas parties. Even now, it's been a few years, but 4 teams that I was on face-to-face in Naples, Italy, in Aviano, Italy, and with Americans that are here in DC, and we still are friends. We still talk. We still meet. If that were a virtual team, I rest assured that we were not having those meetings. We're not going to meet. We're not going to even talk. That's a huge difference there. The camaraderie is much better when you're meeting and having a face-to-face team. The success factors, what are the differences between the success factors? I think face-to-face, you have a good team, and you're saying, okay, this is fire protection. We got this guy on commissioning, or he's doing fire protection. That's his deal. He's doing it. His success factor, because he was face to face working on that program, on that project, his success was that he was there virtually, not virtually, but face to face. He was there contacting, doing all the stuff on the ground. He was the person in charge. Now, virtually, that's all out there, man, because he was doing fire protection, or he was doing commissioning. He's not there. He's only there when he needs to be there. And it's his job, but he had other things to do too. He's working on all these other projects. He can take ownership of that project, but was he on that project? Maybe not. Maybe it was somebody else that they hired to do virtually that fire protection analysis. Maybe he wasn't there all the time. he definitely didn't have the same relationship with the program manager and the customer as the person that was there full time. Does that make sense?
It does. So, and that reduces success when you're not there all the time?
It doesn't reduce success, but it increases the risk that people don't understand what it is. When you're trying to pull together a program management team and you're trying to convince your client that, hey, we need to have full-time people either on the site full-time or 3 days a week and part-time 2 days or something like that, they don't need that. They don't quite understand the significance of what that means because they think that you can hire somebody virtually and that person can come out once a week or once a month and do the scheduling and be on top of it or do the commissioning. They don't understand the risk they're taking because that person needs to be there full time, whether it's for the construction contractor or for the government as the consultant, the construction management team. Somebody needs to be there full time to manage this face to face and be accountable and responsible. It's hard to people and own up and have them accountable and responsible if they're working virtually on these larger programs and projects. I think many people would disagree with me on that only because it has to do with a lot of money, because it takes a lot of money to have these people out there. But the money that's invested, in my opinion, and many people would agree with this, is that it would save you money to reduce that risk. And that's why we do in many of these programs hire full-time schedulers that are program schedulers, that we hire people that are full-time cost estimators. We hire commissioning experts that are doing it and understand commissioning, whether it's only electrical or only mechanical or just one person that's good in general. That person's really invaluable, especially if it's a high-risk project. It's almost impossible to do something like that. You could virtually, you could do it and you could hire the company to come in every now and then, only when it's needed or something like that. And it works and it could be a success, but the risk factor, somebody's got to take it. It's either on the contractor side or on the government or the consultant side. Somebody's got to help reduce that risk, if that makes sense.
It does. With your project, with this question at the beginning, you talked about the trust and the camaraderie that happened. And it makes me think of the problem solving in the moment on these projects for success. I would imagine that in face to face problem solving is easier because of that trust and camaraderie. People are more open to trusting somebody else's diagnosis or remedy to the problem. Do you think that's true?
It is and it isn't. In the face-to-face world, you're good at problem solving. Yeah, it's probably there, but it's more about reducing the risk. Whereas you're on the virtual world, man, I can get somebody in California to give me some advice that, and they're experts in this one little weird transformer that we're trying to figure out. The
Mhm.
weird question technically, they're really good, and I could go in and it's just like having a doctor. I'd love to have the best doctor doing my open heart surgery. Can they get here from California or overseas or whatever? They, but they can do it virtually. That would be good. Over, we can't just stop thinking about getting that expert in virtually, even though we have a full-time person.
Mm,
And then the full-time person that's in charge of commissioning needs to understand that, yeah, I'm an electrical engineer, but I'm not the expert on everything electrical in the world. There's sometimes where you have to say, hey, I give up. Let's get Jack in.
absolutely.
But
So
if
it's
you didn't have that person down there full time and you have the program manager who just happens to be an architect who doesn't understand the nuances of civil engineering, they're not going to know. They're just going to make that decision because they're an architect of this. They need to know when to call people and when not to call people. That's the talent that people need to have.
yeah.
um,
So it's a combination of them both.
Yeah, it is. It is. You can really use the virtual world. Again, it's one of those things. When my son, next generation comes up as civil engineers, they're going to have to use this and think about it and meet face to face, but they're going to have to think about what's out there, not just who the expert is, but what applications out there that can solve their problem. We were talking about LiDAR yesterday. We went in underneath the building and looked at MI and looked at the foundations, and we talked about, hey, there's a new thing called LiDAR. I can put it on, and I have a little adapter to my iPhone with an app with it's a laser detection system, and it'll map out everything in the room. That's cool. We can look at as-built and look at the LiDAR and have an artificial intelligence app that takes my LiDAR and goes into the 3D CAD and matches everything up. That's not here now, but it's going to be here when he's in 20 years. I guarantee somebody's going to come up with that idea to be able to do that. And if they haven't already, then that's something that we need to put some money into because it's going to be valuable to go in and check somebody's before a building program, check their as-built with LiDAR. That would be invaluable. And we could even do ground penetrating radar to look underneath the ground with the as-built and just say, okay, this is what we came up with. That could be a huge business into its own.
Absolutely. It's so funny.
And
We're back to
yeah,
technology, and this is the
yeah,
next question. How has technology changed your approach in developing effective virtual managers within the last 10 years?
there used to be a thing where they go in and they say, we got to get a younger person because this was the last 10 years because we don't understand this technology. And Virginia's great at technology. So let's put her on it because she's young. That to me is no longer the case. I think that many, even the people in their 60s and 70s are really grasping onto the new technology. It's becoming easier to use with the Zoom and with all the things that we do with artificial intelligence. They're grasping it just like the younger guys are. And so how do we what was the question again? How do we use this in order to
How has
improve?
technology changed your approach in developing effective virtual managers within the last 10 years?
Last 10 years, man, it's gone from A to Z with teams just changing and constantly improving, with Zoom constantly improving, with all the other tools out there, the apps and all this stuff that we're using. In order for me uh, to develop these guys, it doesn't take much. I can take a guy who has no clue on anything computer related, even my wife who's been doing stuff with iPrograms. I can give her some tools to do things and it's great. So yeah, it's taken some time, but it's gotten to a point where it's not so hard as it was before. We don't have to be programmers to be able to do some of this stuff. We can take up an app and look at it, and I can get my managers pretty up to speed pretty quickly on the new thing in there for virtual leadership and run with it. And even the stuff we're doing with ASCE, it's great because there's new things out there. They understand it. None of the team members now are like opposed to it. As 10 years ago, or even when I did this study, there were a lot of people who just didn't get it. They didn't want to use some of this stuff. They found, and I think we came up with the conclusion that, hey, just giving a conference call was better than doing the virtual teams as far as MS Teams and Zoom video wise. We were doing a lot more of the conference calls because the technology, especially overseas, with the bandwidth wasn't there. For me, I'd prefer that everybody show their face because I like when people I can see what they're with expression, see where they are, see things. I like to talk to people. Maybe it's just me, but I think it's more important to see that and get their impressions. I know we're doing this and you're not looking at me because I'm in the car. There are times where it's good to do like this because you already know the people. You don't really need to
Exactly.
see their face. It's good, but there are also times where you're having 20, 30 people. I'd rather see everybody. I'd rather say, okay, that's important as well. Is that improve? Yeah, that's in the last 10 years, that's freaking improved because our bandwidth, I used to say, hey, we can't do certain things because the bandwidth in Europe and US, but man, we got 5G. We have all this stuff up there that's making even Wi-Fi possible. We're talking to people almost daily in Greece and Turkey and Bahrain and all these areas in Europe and Italy, and there's no problem with the bandwidth, even virtually. We'll have this, we'll have these FaceTime calls. It's all there. We'll do using WhatsApp, and there's no problem with this anymore.
Leads into the second to last of our questions. Do you see new emerging technologies in the next 5 or 10 years which you feel may change the industry or customer base?
Could be with artificial intelligence. Yeah, that could change the customer base for construction management companies like my company to be able to offer services that weren't seen before, especially with the LiDAR stuff and the as-builds, or doing things with virtually going in and doing surveys and stuff, building condition assessments, things like that would now versus in the next 5 or 10 years versus 10 years from now would be improved and be able to do those services at a lower cost and more efficiently. Um, yeah, it's definitely going to be a different world with AI out there, and we got to all be careful of it because what we do is engineering. What we do is something that has to do with the safety of our community.
Mm.
When we're building wastewater treatment plants, we can't just design it using this bot and then throw it out there and say, oh, yeah, that's good. We have to make sure that the crap gets cleaned, you know, that when it rains, it's not going to overflow and we're not going to have problems. We have to make sure that what we do protects the society, especially with all the levees and all the different flood prevention stuff that we're doing now. It's easy to design something and throw it out there and put your initials on it and sign off on it with the artificial intelligence stuff that we have right now. But we can't do that. We have to be responsible for what we do. There's going to be
Absolutely.
technologies that's out there in the next 10 years that'll push this to the next level. And hopefully people won't die, but I guarantee that there's going to be people that are going to die because they didn't design things. They always have. Bridges are included, but somebody's going to die because of this, and then we're going to really have to take a really hard look at this artificial intelligence world and have a
Absolutely.
little bit more ownership. I think we're trying to it as an industry, but until companies are forced to put this in their handbook, an artificial intelligence policy, until we get a good grip on it, I think unfortunately we're going to have to learn from our mistakes, just like we've done in the past.
Mm. It's like the saying that with great power comes great responsibility. AI
Yeah.
has great power to be faster for us and deliver things at a much quicker rate. And at what cost? That great
Yeah.
power also has a kickback of if you're not safeguarding it, which takes time. And then that adds time, which you thought was going to be saved by the fastness of it.
Yeah.
Are
Man, it's
you?
definitely improving. I think Word and Excel, PowerPoint, and Office is just. I'm looking at my calendar now, and I'm looking at my next call, which is at 11, but it has a little line, red line. It says it's 10:11. It's like that was never there 5 years ago. It's really neat. Back and forth to the left and right, see what I'm doing tomorrow and the next day, and see my schedule. We didn't do that before,
No.
and even to do and all this stuff that I'm doing on the cell phone. It's just 10 years ago, we didn't have any of this stuff. So another 10 years, who knows what they're going to have. They're going to be driving down the road with the weird sunglasses and just be
And
talking to
hands
somebody
off,
virtually.
maybe.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
like you're in the subway, just hanging out, reading a book. Are you or your organization working on new ways to improve virtual team performance, organization, or knowledge management? And this is our final question.
Yes. Processes and procedures are extremely important with everything we did. Oh my God, this guy almost hit me. I'm
Oh,
parked. So, yeah, process improvements. We created in our last project a process improvement for a disruptive access request. We're going into some of these labs and doing constructions, and it was a whole process and procedures. But what I called process and procedures are owned and managed process and procedures. Yeah, we're looking at a lot of that, and the process procedures for all of construction management, program management, project management, some of the things we're standardizing. I've written applications, I've written process procedures for a lot of these things. The Construction Management Association of America with a certified construction manager, which is what like an exam that you take and you become a CCM like I am, which talks about the quality assurance, talks about all the things and all the different things you need to have on these projects and programs, construction and design related. But they're mostly like, what is the project management plan? What's your quality management plan? All those plans have processes and procedures. Not to get into any more really strong detail, but all of those plans need to, and there's many of them that are required, need to have strong processes and procedures into it. So what we're doing is we're developing these strong processes and procedures to a point where any large program or project can use it, and they can develop their own processes and procedure, if that makes sense. So if you're on a project and you need a construction management plan, or you need a disruption access request process procedure for whatever hospital, whatever construction project you're doing, then here's the template for it. And then you get your construction manager, whoever it is in your team, to own and manage it throughout the duration of your project or your program. So we're working on that together with some of the construction management information systems and databases that we're working on. With thing I developed a bunch when I was with NAFAC, and it was an access, and they were for design build and design bid build and lease construct. So the three different aspects of it. And so I have all this information in it, and literally there is nothing like it even now. And so we're working on that to be able to pull that out within the next year or so. Just to, I think it's a little easier now to come up with those old databases and come up with the things that really, because I put in some algorithms that were really unique for work in place projection, some other things that we were doing in the program management of these this construction management information systems programs that we had. And so I like to pull that out. Yeah, we're using that, and hopefully we'll get into artificial intelligence, and we'll meet with a couple companies that are into it, and we can dive down that world of the AI world as well. It's not enough to say, hey, we're using, and this is unique because we're using, Copilot, or we're using ChatGPT. You can't say that. You have to have your own little kind of niche market. And I think within the construction management and program management world, we're coming up with that. And we'll see. Hopefully, next 5, 10 years, the next 4 or 5 years, William will graduate college, and then he can help do it.
Amazing. That would be
Yeah.
incredible. It's really
Yeah.
exciting. So exciting. Any closing thoughts about virtual teams, executive leadership in the virtual world?
After COVID, things have changed. We are meeting, and I've heard other people say this, way more virtually. We're allowing people to work at home way more now than we did in the past. It's becoming really common to see that. Even schools are having their laptops with their kids, and being prepared in case something like this comes up again. But they're also saying, okay, this is normal. If we have a snow day, you can work virtually, which would be unheard of before the COVID epidemic. So it definitely was something that changed the world forever. And the world of how we've put our head around virtual executive leaders and leadership isn't even there yet. We haven't even scratched the surface of what it means to be an effective virtual executive leader. I really think that, if anything, with this research and hopefully with the continued interviews that we have, that we'll come up with some new ideas and new ways for virtual executive leaders to become more effective, proactive, and better at developing, especially high performance teams. So
Mm,
hopefully it makes sense.
it's so exciting. I'm excited to be a part of this. So thank you so much.
Okay.
And I think we're good to go. Thank you.